Astonishing Legends Network.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the show. Just a couple of words before we begin. First, I just want to remind you, on Patreon, we're doing this new thing, Patreon Behind the Curtain. So if there are those of you out there who are desperate to see me as I'm reading the podcast for the recording, if you join at the Obsessed fan level, you get to see this. It'll be on your Patreon. And we're doing it for this episode and for the next episode. Basically, all of the traditional written episodes, you'll be able to see this. And there may be a point where some of the interviews that I do as bonus episodes, I'll be starting to give you the opportunity to see the actual Zoom, but that's kind of based on whether a guest is cool with that. And I typically don't want to burden them with having to comb their hair if they're going to talk to me. But anyway, yeah, if you're excited about that, if you want to support the show and you want to get a little visual, thrill, you can subscribe at the Obsessed fan level, and you can get Behind the Curtain where you see me. And of course, on Patreon, you're also going to get commercial-free episodes, and you'll get bonus episodes and access to exclusive merch. There's a few other things you get. And hey, listen, if you want to support the show, but you don't want to do Patreon, I totally get it. Times are hard right now. A great way to do it is to review on Apple Podcasts or on Spotify. Write us a nice review. Give us 5 stars. That really does help. And it's been a while. You guys have been great, but the reviews have kind of slowed down a little bit. But please feel free. If you've been meaning to do it and you haven't done it yet, jump on Apple Podcasts or Spotify specifically with those two, and go ahead and give us a review or give us 5 stars. That would really be wonderful. I would love that. One final thing about Spotify that I've noticed on the Spotify mobile app, and I just want to bring it up because I want to be clear what it is I'm sharing with you guys creatively and what I am not. On the mobile app on Spotify, what I'm seeing is that they're dividing my show into chapters. Okay, that's being done by automation. That's being done by AI. That is not me doing it. My show is not written in chapters, and it's certainly not written for an AI program to randomly divide it up into chapters. It's not supposed to be listened to in chapters. It's supposed to be listened to from beginning to end, not like, oh, I think I'll jump in the middle and start listening. That's not how this particular podcast works. I'm only telling you that because if you do see that feature, I want you to know that that's not something I'm doing. Okay. And I don't think it makes sense for the show, but of course you can listen to the show any way you want. I don't record the show to be listened at double speed, but I know some people do that. Or at an extra slow speed. You can do whatever you want. I just want you to know, because this show that we're producing is based on making creative decisions, I want you to know who's making those decisions. And the person making those decisions is me, and me in concert with Kevin Ducey, our sound engineer, and me and with Nima Kazaruni, our composer, and with everyone else who works on the show. But that's what we're bringing you. We're bringing you something that we do. I don't use AI in any part of the production. That's not a big pat on the back for me. That's just me telling you that's not how I go about this. I enjoy writing the show for you. You enjoy listening to the show. I'm not looking to cut corners by having a machine write the show descriptions, the intros, the content. That's not why I'm doing this. I'm specifically doing it for the opposite reason. I'm doing it so that it's a creative act from me to you. That is the loop we're creating here. All right. So all of which is to say, the chapters that are being offered to you on Spotify's mobile app, to me, that's a creative decision. If I write a book, if an author writes a book, they make a decision about where to make the chapters begin and end. That's a creative decision. I don't know how Spotify AI is doing it, but it is, I'm not signing off on it. All right. Just so you know, if you use it, use it. Just know I'm not doing it. That's not what I'm doing. Now, there may come a time, maybe even as soon as season 4, when I write the show specifically in 2 parts, Act 1, Act 2, so that in the middle, I can decide where a commercial break goes. Because people have been telling me, sometimes various platforms want you to do commercial breaks. Sometimes they'll cut right in. Well, I definitely don't want that. But if there's an opportunity to have a commercial in there, if it helps me financially, and God knows I need it, I may do that. But if I do it, it'll be me doing it purposefully and saying, okay, here's act one of the show. It'll end at a specific point. Believe me, I've been doing that for 30 years when I write TV. And then act two begins, and then that'll be the rest of the show. Now, I'm not saying I'm going to do it, but I'm thinking of it. Scott Philbrook has told me, hey, commercials can be sold. You might want to consider doing it. And when Scott talks, I listen. And so that might happen. It might not. But the point is, if it does happen, I'll be making that decision, not a program or an algorithm or something else that is not basically passionately involved in the creation of this show, which is, again, a creative effort. It's something that I am making for you. Anyway, okay, enough of all that. Here we go. We're going to listen to the Siren Call of Hungry Ghosts, Part 1. You know what, folks? Listen to Part 1 and then come back next week and listen to Part 2. Sometimes Part 1s get more listens than Part 2s, but on this one, you're going to want to hear Part 2. Anyway, but we're at Part 1. Okay, so enjoy the show. Here we go. The Siren Call of Hungry Ghosts by Joe Fisher, Part 1. I have only ever considered adapting two true stories of the paranormal into films. One was The Mothman Prophecies by John Keel. The other was The Siren Call of Hungry Ghosts by Joe Fisher, Paraview Press, 2001. Both are first-hand accounts of strange and sinister supernatural forces. In both books, the author becomes the focus of the phenomenon. Both books are filled with incredible narrative details. They feel like fiction, which makes the fact of their reality even more compelling and frightening. I optioned John Keel's Mothman Prophecies in 1997 and wrote the script, and the movie got made, and I'm very glad it did. That whole process began when, as soon as I finished reading Keel's book, I got in touch with him and began a correspondence that led to a meeting and an eventual friendship. With The Siren Call of Hungry Ghosts, things played out differently. I was hesitant to call Joe Fisher. There was something grim, almost evil, about his story and the spirit guides he wrote about and what they did to him. Maybe this was not a story he would be eager to revisit. And maybe, just maybe, I was afraid. Maybe the spirits in Joe's book didn't want me to retell their story, at least not the way it was told in Joe's book. And make no mistake, in Joe's book, they're the bad guys. But finally, I decided it was worth a try. I looked him up online and was shocked to learn that he was dead. Joe Fisher committed suicide by jumping off a limestone cliff at Elora Gorge near his hometown of Fergus, Ontario, Canada. For anyone who has read the book, it is impossible not to see his death as a chilling, tragic coda to the events he describes in its pages. The news of his death was so upsetting to me that I had to read the obituary twice just to take it in. I kept staring at the date of his death, May 9th, 2001. Why was it so troubling to me? Finally, it hit me. The day I was reading it was May 9th, 2006. Somehow, bizarrely, it was exactly 5 years later to the day. I closed my computer and put the book in the giveaway pile and didn't think about it again. I did this without conscious thought. It was as if my body was rejecting the idea of adaptation and indeed the book itself, and my mind wisely didn't question the decision. The Siren Call of Hungry Ghosts is the scariest book I've ever read. Scary in its effect and its implications. It makes me question things at a basic level, like, who exactly are we talking to when we talk to the dead? The skeptics say that communication with the dead is all a deception carried out by greedy, unscrupulous charlatans. The Siren Call of Hungry Ghosts takes this theory one step further and suggests an even darker scenario. There's a word I haven't used yet, and it's central to our story. The word is channeling. Channeling is a form of direct voice mediumship, which means that the spirit speaks directly from the mouth of the medium in a distinct individual voice, their own voice. What is unique about channeling is that the spirit in question identifies itself as a spirit guide, and its purpose is to dispense universal knowledge about spiritual evolution. Channeling rose in popularity during the 1980s, and by 1984, when this story begins, Joe Fisher had already worked for almost 20 years as a journalist and investigative reporter for both the Toronto Star and the Toronto Sun. But he had also spent many years investigating metaphysical topics and had published books in that field, including The Case for Reincarnation, Collins Publishers, Toronto, 1984. While doing publicity for this book, Fisher gave an interview on the Toronto radio station CFRB. It was soon after this that he was contacted by a listener, a woman named Aviva Newman, who told him a strange story. She had recently become the unwitting mouthpiece for a number of spirit guides and was hoping Fisher might be able to shed some light on exactly what was happening to her. Newman's story is a strange one, but it's important to know so that we can understand exactly what it was Joe Fisher was encountering on the night of Friday, July 20th, 1984, when he arrived at her Parkdale townhouse, just minutes outside downtown Toronto, and witnessed his first demonstration of channeling. Aviva was a cynical, chain-smoking 42-year-old mother of three who worked as a laboratory technologist and took no interest in psychic phenomena. She described herself as a, quote, normal person with normal interests. So how did she become a channeler? Well, several years earlier, Aviva had been diagnosed with chronic myelocytic leukemia, a life-threatening disease. A neighbor of hers, Roger Bellencourt, was a part-time hypnotist. He offered to hypnotize Aviva and administer what he referred to as, quote, corrective medical suggestions to your subconscious mind. They met twice a week, and within a few months it was clear that these treatments were indeed helping. But Aviva was still plagued with pain and fatigue, so Roger experimented with techniques to bring her into deeper and deeper trances, hoping to bolster the effects of the hypnosis. One evening he was shocked to hear Aviva suddenly speak in a strong, deep voice and announce that he was now in contact with Aviva's alter consciousness, a state much deeper than the subconscious. Roger discovered that there were many alter consciousnesses, each one associated with a specific organ in Aviva's body, and he could speak to and communicate with anyone he wished. When medical tests revealed a low red blood cell count, Roger waited for Aviva's next hypnotic trance, and then he addressed Aviva's blood cells directly. And I guess they talked things over and came to some sort of agreement, because the next time she got her blood checked, the doctors were shocked to see a dramatic increase in her red blood cell count. Then things got weird. Roger had become aware of the concept of channeling spirit guides in his various metaphysical studies, and he began to wonder if, when in this deep trance state, Aviva might be able to get in touch with one of these dudes. After months of trying, Roger finally hit pay dirt when he made contact with Russell Parnick, a sheep farmer from Yorkshire Dales who had died more than 100 years ago. He announced that he was Aviva's personal spirit guide. As it turns out, in addition to the various angels and ascended masters, spirit guides are often nothing more than human beings who have lived on Earth and then died, but now play an important role influencing the lives of those still living. And apparently that's what Russell the sheep farmer did for Aviva. Russell spoke for himself in his own voice by manipulating Aviva's vocal cords. Now, one important thing to understand is that Aviva was never aware of any of this. When Russell spoke, she was in a deep trance, and when she woke up and heard about it later, she thought it was complete bullshit. Quote, I just wanted hypnotic medical suggestions to help my mind fight the leukemia. That was all. But one thing led to another, and now these entities are speaking through me. I don't know who they are, and I don't really care. But from what Roger has told me, It seems they're aware of what's going on inside my body, and they're doing their best to take care of me. I've never believed in this so-called psychic world. I've never had a psychic reading. I think astrology is absolute crap, and I've got no time for anything that's supposed to be paranormal. When told what Russell would say during her trances, Aviva said he sounded like a jerk. She was annoyed at his imperious tone and his insistence that she quit smoking. When she heard a tape recording of herself channeling Russell, she was stunned at her, or actually his use of the word alacrity. Alacrity, she said. I never used that word. What the hell does it even mean? But the thing that Aviva couldn't dismiss was the effectiveness of the hypnotic sessions and the uncanny reality of the personalities that came through her. Friday nights soon became devoted to small public demonstrations for selected visitors in her townhouse. And so it was on Friday, July 20th, 1984, that Joe Fisher became acquainted with the reality of channeling for the first time. And 10 weeks later, through Aviva, he met his own spirit guide, a lover from a past life, a beautiful young Greek woman named Filipa Haverlos. The same week that I set aside the siren call of hungry ghosts, I received a text message from my brother, John. Guess who I ran into at Dodger Stadium? Call me. I hate getting texts like this. I hate guess who, and I hate call me. But it was my brother, and when John says call me, I call him. When he told me that the person he had run into was Michael Principato, a jolt went through me. Michael was an old friend from high school who I hadn't spoken to in years, 23 years to be exact. Things had ended badly between us. John said, "We talked for like half an hour. He told me to tell you hi. He said you should call him." My first thought was, hell no. But then I quickly had a second thought. I'm a grown-up now. We both are. High school was a long time ago. A lot has changed. Maybe I don't have to be afraid of people from my past. Maybe it would be healthy to see Michael and revisit what happened between us now that we had the perspective of age. I asked John how he seemed. Was he any different? No, John said with a sigh. He's exactly the same. Of course he is, I thought. Of course. The day I met Michael Principato, the day I really met him, was October 1st, 1980. We'd known each other a few weeks because we'd both been cast in Alhambra High School's fall play, Inherit the Wind, which is a courtroom drama about the Scopes monkey trial. Look it up. I was cast as Davenport, the local district attorney. I had maybe 10 lines, but that didn't matter. I was over the moon to be in the play at all. For most of the first 13 years of my life, all I wanted to do was be on stage. And at Brightwood Elementary School, there weren't a ton of opportunities. Sports, sure. Academics, absolutely. But acting, no. No one at Brightwood cared about acting. So every day for my whole childhood, I felt like a cat among dogs. But now at Alhambra High, I discovered they had a drama department, basically an entire cat club. I could finally be among cats. On the first day of rehearsal, this group of people, my cats, grabbed me by the hands and dragged me into their world of drama. I'm not speaking metaphorically. I was physically dragged onto the stage and made to participate in theater games. I'm not complaining and I'm not making fun. They all had me speaking in gibberish and pretending to be inanimate objects and falling backward into the waiting arms of complete strangers who in a matter of weeks would become the best friends I ever had. How can I even describe the pleasure of suddenly being among these highly articulate, insanely talented group of emotionally damaged but incredibly generous kids? I really didn't know other people like me existed on the earth until I was cast in this play. The joy of being around these people was physical. All day long, I would sit through my classes, but all I'd be thinking about was rehearsal. when I would once again be among my people for 3 whole hours. In this group, Michael Principato was a star. He was cast as Hornbeck, a showboat role which was perfect because Michael was a showboat. He was a junior, 5'6", with a full beard. He wore a dark blue newsboy-style cap, tennis shorts, suspenders, and roller skates. He skated everywhere. He glided through the halls of Alhambra High School. He knew everyone, the geeks, the loadies, the jocks. There was no clique from which he was excluded. His deep booming voice, his bellowing laugh, and his back-slapping, hail fellow well-met attitude made it hard to say no to the guy. He seemed older than all of us. He seemed to know everyone, both in school and out. He seemed to know everything. At least that's how he seemed to me. He was the living embodiment of everything I wanted to be someday. Confident, popular, talented, and admired by everybody. Up until the day I really met Michael, we had probably spoken 4 or 5 times, but I was still pretty shy around the stars. You know, Herb Patterson, Richard Register, Janet Davis, Victor Sheely, the big ones. I tended to hang out with the 10 lines and under crowd. So anyway, one afternoon during rehearsal, I saw Michael hanging out in the house. Oh, sorry, I forgot. You're not all familiar with theater jargon. The house is what we theater people call the audience area, or seats, as opposed to the stage, which we call the stage. He waved me over. Who, me? When I went up to him, I saw that he was filling a notebook with writing. What's that? I asked. I'm writing a play, he said. This statement made no sense to me. Why would he be writing a play? How could he be writing a play? Was it some sort of a school assignment? As it turned out, no, he was just writing a play because he wanted to write a play. He said he'd written a number of them already. I figured they must be about high school kids doing goofy stuff because Michael was really funny, and besides, what else is a 15-year-old kid from Alhambra gonna write? What's the play called? I asked him. He said, Auschwitz. It was Michael Principato's take on Hitler's extermination camps. He's writing about Auschwitz? What could he possibly know about Auschwitz? I wasn't offended. I was impressed, astounded even. He told me the last play he wrote before this one was a one-man show called God. Oh my. Whatever estimation I previously held him in, it obviously wasn't high enough. This guy was in a whole other league, a creative and intellectual juggernaut. I would have to be playing at the top of my game at all times with this guy, and maybe it still wouldn't be good enough. If I really worked it, maybe by the time we graduated, he deigned to call me a friend. It didn't take that long. We became friends immediately. It must have helped that I thought of him as a living legend. Who doesn't want that energy around? I read Auschwitz. It took place at Auschwitz. And the lead character was a 15-year-old boy who, like Michael, was an actor and writer, and who also loved to draw. The character pretty much was Michael, just without the roller skates. In the play, Michael's character had an indomitable spirit and kept his family and those around him from losing hope. I don't know if I thought the play was great or if I was just blown away by the sheer chutzpah it took to write it in the first place. Either way, I wanted that chutzpah. Michael was always doing something, drawing, painting. He was an amazing artist. Reading, writing, playing tennis, or just regaling people with stories it seemed impossible for him to have experienced at such a young age. He never seemed bored or depressed, which I always was. In a lot of ways, Michael was my first real friend, because he saw value in the things other people made fun of. All the weird stuff I liked, the Night Stalker, the Rockford Files, the Marx Brothers, he thought it was all cool. He encouraged all the things everyone else discouraged. He thought I was hysterically funny, when in truth, he was way funnier. I've never laughed harder than I laughed that first year I knew Michael. I finally felt seen, appreciated, valued. With Michael, I finally felt at home on the earth. Soon, I held the exalted position of Michael Principato's sidekick, and I could not have been happier. It was like hanging with a movie star. It elevated my status instantly. People to whom I was invisible before suddenly noticed me, and based on my proximity to Michael and his obvious approval of me, granted me their approval and access. I became well-known and well-liked all over campus, and I was only a freshman. Finally, I had my very own identity. I was Michael Principato's best friend. Remember your last crush? Not your first one, your last one. Maybe it was somebody at work. Maybe it was somebody online. Now, if you're in a relationship, having a crush fulfills a very specific purpose. In your heart, they are perfect, because they magically possess whatever is lacking in your real-life situation. They think you're interesting. They think your stories are funny. They think you're smart or sexy or that you're a great catch or your partner's lucky to have you. And their unattainability only adds to their allure. Before our crush, we are helpless, vulnerable, and exposed. We're attractive, witty, and desirable, and it feels wonderful. Best of all, your crush knows you, maybe better than anyone else on earth. That's how it was for Joe Fisher. He had a major crush on his spirit guide, Filipa Yavrilos. True, she was just a soft voice speaking bad English in a Greek accent through the mouth of an unconscious chain smoker, but who knows where that could lead. They spoke to each other for the first time on the night of October 12th, 1984. And the story she told about Joe and herself was absolutely irresistible. According to Filipa, they had spent many lifetimes together, alternating roles of male and female, and always playing out those roles as lovers. Their most recent incarnation was in a peasant village in Greece in the early 1700s. Their passion led to a transgression in the eyes of the community, and Joe was driven out of the village. It's not hard to imagine what this transgression might have been. Come on, couple of hot Greek teenagers, please. It wasn't hard for Joe to imagine either. He was fascinated by his apparent soulmate. True, he was skeptical in a general way, but this was a guy who had just published a book about reincarnation. The idea that we've all had past lives intertwined with an ever-repeating, role-changing stock company of souls was not new to him. And now he was being told that this particular soul, Filipa, was his guide in this life, taking an intense, benevolent interest in all of his affairs. Her description of their life together in the village of Theros was utterly compelling and believable. And while Joe had absolutely no memory of this past life or any other of the many he apparently shared with Filipa, he found himself deeply curious as to what their reunion might be like once they met again in the between-life state. Filipa described what he was like as a young Greek man, tall, swift, and pretty shredded. She told him he had dark eyes and dark hair, large hands and feet, and while he was usually quite proper, discretion was not his strong suit. He was banished from the village because of what happened between him and Filipa. The elders did not want him corrupting young women. But Filipa was heartbroken to see him go, so she snuck out of the village to meet him at night in the dark countryside where they could continue their transgressions. Joe says, quote, "She gave the impression that could she only materialize physically, she would snuggle romantically beside me. Her messages may have been delivered in public, and often in the third person, but they hinted at tenderness, seduction, and shared confidences." Joe was totally hot for Filipa, which made things awkward for him with his actual, still alive as a physical human being girlfriend, Rachel. Joe tried to describe his research into channeling as dispassionately as he could and present Filipa as nothing more than an incredibly novel aspect of the phenomenon. No dice. Rachel became visibly pissed off each time the subject turned to Joe's Friday night dates with Aviva and, by direct association, Filipa. Just to prove that everything was above board, Joe invited Rachel to come with him to a session the next Friday. So Rachel did. And Joe was shocked when her spirit guide presented himself instantly and spoke to her in his own Scottish accented voice. His name was William, and he had last lived in Edinburgh from 1642 to 1665. You didn't think I was going to get Edinburgh, did you? William informed Rachel that they had spent many lifetimes together, mostly as parent and child. Rachel was charmed by his tone, but after a few Friday nights, she stopped attending the sessions. She claimed that while William gave her no real reason to feel uncomfortable, there was something disturbing to her about the whole thing, something almost physically repulsive. While William's words were always kind, Rachel claimed to have felt a definite negativity in the air that wasn't just restricted to William. Joe, of course, assumed that this was just jealousy directed at Filipa. After all, he and Filipa used to be lovers. William and Rachel were just family. As weeks went by, Filipa instructed Joe in meditation techniques that could allow them to communicate directly with one another. This, of course, would provide a far greater degree of intimacy. Joe devoted an hour every day to trying to contact Filipa, but with no luck. And throughout this time, his relationship with Rachel, the still alive girl, continued to decline. Meanwhile, at the Friday night sessions, an ever-increasing cast of spirit guides made their way to Aviva's townhouse via her vocal cords. From the book, there was Ernest, who had fought in World War II as a bomber pilot with the Royal Air Force; Sanji, a wealthy landowner from Kathmandu, Nepal, who died of natural causes at the age of 66; Tuktu, who lived in Ceylon in his most recent incarnation, yet whose name hailed from a life in Korea; Kingala, an African huntsman from the 15th century, who lived, quote, on the Mother River near the Mother Lake; Franco, an Argentinian tailor who died in a political upheaval in 1903; and David, a farm boy from South Carolina who loved fishing. Even the most skeptical of observers had to concede that Aviva could never consciously produce the stream of autobiographies and accents and speech patterns that floated so effortlessly from her lips. She gave riveting performances week after week. There were awe-inspiring soliloquies, tales of sadness and nostalgia, snippets of humor, moments of heart-stopping perceptiveness, and extraordinary medical analysis. Advice was dispensed in abundance to the distressed, sick, and metaphysically maladjusted, really to anyone who made an inquiry. After a while, it was hard to tell who was more addicted to these sessions, the living visitors to Aviva's home or the ghosts. In any case, on both sides of the grave, the number of guests on Friday night kept expanding. By the end of my freshman year, it was pretty clear. If Michael Principato was going somewhere, I was coming along for the ride. And if I was going somewhere, it was because Michael had invited me to go with him. It was the last week of the school year when the head of the drama department, Mrs. Drager, asked me and Michael to meet with her after school. We went to her office, a small room backstage in the main auditorium. I was pretty sure she was going to ask Michael and I to do something extremely important that involved acting, because she knew we were serious professionals and we were the only ones she could count on. And as it turned out, I was completely right. When we arrived, she was holding a small stack of papers, and Michael and I could both see it was a typewritten script. Mrs. Drager asked us, "Have you ever heard of Ernest Holmes?" What followed was kind of surprising. Well, it turned out that Mrs. Drager belonged to something called the Church of Religious Science, which was founded by a guy named Ernest Holmes. Now, to be clear, the Church of Religious Science isn't the same thing as the Church of Christian Science, and neither one of those is Scientology. But Michael and I were hearing about all of this for the first time, so For once in our lives, we shut up and listened, because the truth was, we idolized Mrs. Drager. She was maybe 30, but from where we stood, she was as grown-up as the most grown-up we'd ever known. She directed main stage productions and taught most drama classes. Plus, she was an expert at all the backstage stuff like set construction, lighting, sound, costumes, makeup, everything. She was a theatrical superstar. She was the only adult we knew who did anything close to what we dreamed of doing for a living. And our favorite thing about her was that while she was cool and casual, she also took theater deadly seriously. She could go from goofy friend to fire and brimstone director in the course of a sentence. But it never felt abusive. Her anger, when it came, felt oddly respectful, like she respected us and the theater enough to be real with us. It never felt personal, and it always flared up and then passed on by like a summer storm, forgotten until the next one gathered in the sky. The gist of the meeting was this. The Church of Religious Science was having a West Coast meetup in late June at a place called Asilomar, a seaside conference center in Monterey, California. The script that she held in her hand was a 31-page monologue she had written, a one-man show about Ernest Holmes. She wanted Michael to perform this one-man show at the conference, and she wanted me to come along to do Michael's makeup. The deal included room and board and 2 round-trip bus tickets from Los Angeles to Monterey, but we would have happily paid her to do it. To make Mrs. Drager happy, even better to go on a trip, just the 2 of us without our parents. This was magic beyond our wildest dreams. This was going to happen. This had to happen. Ask your folks, she said, and if they have any questions, have them call me. I knew my parents technically had to say yes before I could go, but I also knew, deep down, that there was no way I wasn't going on this trip. Getting dropped off at the downtown LA Greyhound station at 6 a.m. was scary. I mean, I wanted to feel bold, but I'll admit it, I was scared. A bus station at any hour isn't exactly glamour central, and I was embarrassed by the loneliness I felt after my dad dropped me and Michael off. Standing there in the middle of the bus noise and the gassy smell and the hundreds of strangers surrounding us, I don't think I've ever felt more like a kid. But once we got on the bus, I was fine. The seats were big and soft and comfortable and smelled like cleaning products, and I've always loved that smell. Michael and I settled into our seats. We had a brochure that explained how many stops we'd make and how long each stop would be along the way, and it assured us that we would arrive in Monterey, a 5-hour drive from Los Angeles, in just under 11 hours. The first hour was pretty familiar stuff. The 5 freeway heading north, downtown LA, the usual suburbs, Glendale, Burbank, but once we were past the Grapevine and heading toward Bakersfield, it was a whole new world. I mean, yeah, it was basically the same world, farmland, I'd seen it before, but now I was seeing it on my own, without my parents, for the first time in my life, truly away. Best of all, I was seeing it with Michael Principato. We spent that first hour burning through our excitement by joking about everything we saw. But pretty soon, we were both into our books. He had a stack of X-Men, Daredevil, and Moon Knight comic books. I was trying to read Dashiell Hammett's Red Harvest, mostly to impress Michael, who had already read everything Dashiell Hammett had ever written. But to be honest, I was having trouble with it. The style was so unlike anything I'd ever encountered, I was struggling to keep up with who was doing what to who and why. When we finally stopped in Bakersfield, it was 100 degrees and we each had $20. We got burgers and fries and Cokes and bags of chips and candy bars for the rest of the trip. I got my favorites, a Marathon bar and a box of Junior Mints. I bought some Bakersfield postcards too, to send to my parents so they wouldn't get too lonely during the 4 days I was gone. We found a Pac-Man machine, and each of us blew through $1 in quarters. I don't think I've ever been happier. The Bakersfield bus station was basically heaven. It had everything I wanted out of life. If being a grown-up was like being in this bus station every day, I was going to love being a grown-up. Now, you don't expect your life to change in a Bakersfield bus station, and certainly not for the better. But sometimes that's just how it goes. We had a few minutes before the bus was supposed to leave, so we went straight for the paperback rack, the old-fashioned rotating kind. We had made a deal on the bus. If there was a Stephen King book at the bus station, I had to buy it. I had never read any Stephen King before, and Michael was adamant that that had to change now. Michael was hoping we'd find Salem's Lot, his favorite, but it wasn't there. In fact, the only one they had was something called The Stand. What the fuck was The Stand? Michael knew, he'd read it, and he was very excited. "Richard, this book will change your life," he said. "By the end, you don't just know the characters, you are the characters." Could this be true? Could a book change my life? Over time, I would learn that Michael didn't know everything, and about some things he would prove to be completely full of shit. But 45 years later, I've got to give him this. He was right about Stephen King. I took the brand new paperback copy of The Stand off the rack and pawed at it and sniffed it like an animal, like I always do. I flipped to the last page. The book was 843 pages long, far longer than any book I'd ever read. How could any book be this long? Then I saw that it was actually divided into 3 parts: Captain Trips, On the Border, and The Stand. I measured each part with my fingers stuck between the pages and compared their relatively equal lengths and thought, oh, it's not just structured by chapters, it's divided into parts, 3 parts, like a play has 3 acts, I guess. I wonder if this novel works like a play. I wonder if I will understand why he structured it like this when I'm done. These thoughts only took a second. I wasn't aware I was even thinking them. But something inside me was already trying to figure this thing out, this novel, how it was built, how it worked. 10 minutes later, we were back on the bus and I was into The Stand, reading the words and taking in the events, but just below that, a second part of my mind was attacking every part of the book from every angle, measuring, weighing, judging, probing, sniffing, tasting, feeling, figuring. We arrived in Monterey at exactly 6:21 p.m. The sun was still high in the sky, but now the air was cold and smelled like the ocean. I was almost 200 pages into The Stand, and although I didn't know it yet, I was also 5 hours into my life's real education. You might think that Joe Fisher's infatuation with Filipa made him incapable of evaluating channeling phenomenon in general, but you'd be wrong. He was both completely aware of his growing fascination with this invisible woman, and at the same time deeply skeptical about her actual existence as a real person, the person she claimed to have been. He knew that confirming the identity of a woman in a peasant village in Greece from 300 years ago would most likely be impossible. But he knew he had to prove the identity of at least one of the guides. After all, he was still a reporter, and all of this research into channeling was for his next book. Of the 20 or so guides who had presented each week, only 4 claimed personalities that had existed on Earth recently enough to provide a reasonable chance for verification. The one Joe decided to focus on was Ernest, the spirit who said he had been a pilot for the Royal Air Force during World War II. The strange story of Ernest begins more than 40 years after his death, in January 1986. This was when he turned up in Aviva's condo, and this was when he started answering Joe's questions about where he served and who with and in what command. And Ernest answered with long, detailed memories of those difficult, scary, but exciting days. During World War II, Ernest explained that he was Flying Officer William Alfred Scott of 99 Squadron Group 3 Bomber Command. He said he had been born in Brighton in 1917, raised in Bristol, and attended Bristol University, where he studied engineering and mathematics. He joined the RAF in 1937 at the age of 20 and was based at RAF Mildenhall, Suffolk, in 1939, moving to Newmarket Heath in September, and then 18 months later moving again with his squadron to RAF Waterbeach. There, he said, he flew a Wimpy, or Vickers Wellington bomber. Now, I don't know about Joe, but all of this is gibberish to me. But the great thing about it is that it is extremely specific, verifiable gibberish. I mean, we're talking about the military. No one keeps records like the military. After weeks of fact-gathering, armed with notes, and tape recordings of Ernest's voice telling war stories through Aviva's mouth, Joe Fisher climbs aboard his own airplane, a 747, and flies over the Atlantic from Toronto to London to check things out personally. That's right, because it's 1986 and there is no internet, and he wants to check some pretty obscure records, so yeah, he has to fly to Europe. And before he leaves, he does a really smart thing. He leaves a transcript of the channeled material with a lawyer to establish that the information had been obtained in Canada prior to his departure. Upon landing, Joe travels to the Public Record Office in the District of Kew, in the London borough of Richmond upon Thames, where War Office records are kept. For the next few hours, he researches the details of William Scott's life. And it's as if Ernest is at his elbow. Story after story, fact after fact are confirmed. Arcane references to improvised military housing, to the style of dining halls, to the particular design of experimental aircraft, it all checks out. Joe's heart soars. All of the time and energy, not to mention pure human emotion, that he's poured into this endeavor of seeking out spirit guides is paying off, and paying off big. This is as close to proof of life after death and reincarnation as any researcher has come in the last 100 years. He pores over musty, dog-eared logbooks of the 99 Squadron's bombing missions that Ernest described in detail. Confirmed. He tracks down records of the other men that Ernest served with, like Ground Captain J.R. Benny Goodman and Wing Commander F.J. Linnell, along with several others. Confirmed. But after checking and rechecking, there's one detail Joe can't seem to nail down: the existence of William Alfred Scott himself. When Joe leaves the record office that afternoon, it's with the nagging frustration of a denied lover. He was so close. But there's other avenues to pursue tomorrow. The next day, records in London reveal that no William Alfred Scott was born in Brighton in 1917, nor died in Coventry in 1944, as Ernest claimed. There are no records of him attending Bristol University or living on Hill Road. In fact, he discovers Bristol has no Hill Road. Desperate for any form of confirmation, Joe manages to track down two members of 99 Squadron still living in the London area, Norman Didwell and Jim Ware. He met them in person and played the tapes of Ernest speaking through Aviva. And here he gets a surprise. Both men were absolutely enthralled by what they heard and confirmed that dozens of obscure details Ernest related were 100% accurate. Joe never told them they were listening to the voice of a ghost. Jim Ware said it sounded like somebody he knew, a rear gunner who flew at least 4 missions with him, a man named Malcolm Scott. So, for the record, the first name is wrong. Ernest said his name was William Scott. But of course, the last name was correct. In Jim Ware's words, quote, "It sounds quite like Scotty. He spoke quick, just like that." Joe can't make sense of it all. So many details were confirmed, but the main one, his actual existence as William Alfred Scott, simply isn't there. I'm at the Asilomar Conference Center, sitting in the choir loft at the very back of the main meeting hall. Below me are 300 grown-ups watching Michael Principato deliver his first ever performance as Ernest Holmes, the founder of the Church of Religious Science. Michael is 1 month away from his 16th birthday, and he has the audience spellbound. I'm well aware that not every kid can do this. It's going unbelievably well. In fact, as far as I can tell, the only problem with the whole show is his makeup, and that was my department. Apparently, the trick with stage makeup is to use white on the bony surfaces of the face and then subtly underscore that with brown to imply shadow. But what the fuck had I done to Michael? His face is covered in harsh black and white stripes. He looks like a kabuki tiger. Doesn't matter. The audience loves it. He gets a standing ovation, and he deserves it. He memorized a 31-page monologue and performed it like he was on Broadway. Mrs. Drager, beaming with pride, comes out on stage and encourages the audience to show their appreciation in the form of cold, hard cash. They pass their version of the plate around, and later, in our room, Michael and I count out $1 and $5 bills that end up totaling $887. This is more money than we'd ever seen at one time. He hands 87 of it to me. Now we are rich. We've hit a crazy jackpot. And in that moment, that summer, it feels like the first jackpot in a lifetime of jackpots that are lined up, waiting to meet us as each new day unfolds. The next night, Michael took me out to dinner at a small romantic restaurant nestled in the woods just outside the conference center. The place only had 6 tables, each one with a white tablecloth and a candle burning inside a frosted glass hurricane lamp. We ate steak and drank Coke and talked about Stephen King and Raiders of the Lost Ark and Tennessee Williams and Neil Simon and Kenny Loggins and Billy Joel. And just as the sun set, he looked me in the eye and said that if I wanted to, I could invent my own superhero character and he'd put it into the comic book he was writing and illustrating that summer, because all of the hero characters were based on our mutual friends. I hadn't been expecting this. I didn't know what to say. But like it had been there, hovering on my tongue and just waiting to be spoken, I said my character should be called Phantom, and he should have the gift of flight. It was perfect. Michael smiled and said that he'd already used the name Phantom in another book, so instead I would be called Spectre. And most of the other characters could fly already, so instead of flying, he would allow Spectre to have the ability to solidify air molecules, allowing him to sort of sit in the air and launch powerful beams of solidified air molecules at his enemies. This was even more perfect. And Spectre would be the main sidekick of Michael's character Artemis, a supernaturally gifted archer. Then Michael started telling me about the comic book he was going to write, actually describing it panel by panel. And as he spoke for the next 2 hours, I couldn't stop marveling at his creativity and how he was already thinking up cool things for Spectre to do to help the hero Artemis in his legendary quest. Michael Principato became my beacon of what was possible. He didn't wait for permission to be creative. He simply was creative every day, as if the very act of creativity were an end in itself. He roller skated through that summer, and I tried to keep up on foot. He was stunned that I'd never seen a James Bond movie, so we saw For Your Eyes Only on opening day, and it is still my favorite of all the Bond movies. Afterwards, we sat in the food court at the mall, as Michael reflected on how there were no other spy franchises like James Bond, and maybe we should make up our own and write it. Write a movie? Jesus, what would this guy come up with next? We spent the afternoon doing just that, but it never went any further. Still, it was the most creative day of my life up until that point, and in my memory, it's one of the best days I ever had. We saw every movie that summer: Stripes, Superman 2, Arthur, Body Heat, Time Bandits, Outland, Wolfen, Dragon Slayer, and Escape from New York. We loved them all, and every single one of them sent us spinning off into fantasies of creating something that could be that special, that loved by the world. I never knew other people felt that way when they saw something they loved. I never knew anyone else who burned so bright and consumed everything in life like fire consumed air. Everything that summer felt undeniable. The future was finally clear to me. We were going to be actors, writers, directors, superstars. We were going to be famous, and the best part, it was all going to happen with my very best friend. Up until then, I'd never had one. Just before Joe Fisher leaves England, he stops in to visit his mother, and he tells her the whole story about Ernest and Filipa and the other spirit guides he's been communicating with, and the disappointing results of his search for absolute confirmation that Ernest once lived here among us on Earth. When he quietly asks himself, if Ernest isn't William Alfred Scott, who is he? He's surprised when his deeply Christian mother answers without hesitation. He's a daemon. You're talking to demons. And I don't like the sound of it one bit. It was only about a month after the Asilomar trip that we heard about Mrs. Drager. She wasn't coming back. She was leaving Alhambra High School. We never found out why. A couple of weeks after that, Michael and I met up at Hustle Bustle for lunch, and he had big news to share. He'd heard from Vanessa Nelson that a guy named B.K. Holthouse was going to be the new head of the drama department. Michael was overjoyed, and it soon became clear why. Michael knew the guy. B.K. Holthouse had been Michael's 7th and 8th grade drama teacher at All Souls Catholic School. B.K. is a great guy, he assured me. I've worked with him a lot. He's cast me as the lead in every show we ever did. But don't worry, I'll talk to him and put in a good word for you. This was so strange. We were all so afraid of Mrs. Drager, afraid of the power she had over us. After all, she was the person who cast every show. Now it was going to be this new guy. And Michael talked about him like they were best friends, even more professional colleagues. He didn't even refer to him as Mr. Holthouse. He called him BK. Deep down, I was relieved. If he liked Michael and Michael liked me, well, that had always been enough. Michael's stamp of approval had gotten me through a lot of doors. Hell, it even got me on a bus all the way to Monterey. Maybe it would help me with BK. A few days later, Michael found out from BK that the fall show was going to be Neil Simon's The Odd Couple. We loved The Odd Couple, not just the play, but the movie and the TV show too. Michael said, you would make an amazing Felix Unger in 2 years. But if I know BK, it's going to be me as Felix and Herb as Oscar. So you've got your choice of the poker players. You should try for Murray. He has the most lines. BK's going to love you, by the way. I'll make sure of that. I started feeling bad that night, and I felt worse the next day. Stress and anxiety, but I couldn't nail it down. It was about auditions, right? I mean, it had to be. This was normal, except this wasn't normal. I wasn't just anxious or nervous. I was scared. Something bad was coming. I could feel it. It was the oldest feeling I knew. It was ancient. Was it my mom? No, I didn't feel the fear around my mom. I felt it around Michael. I was feeling mom fear around Michael. What the fuck was going on? Here's what was going on. I wanted to audition for the part of Felix Unger, but I was terrified it would hurt Michael's feelings. I felt like he would feel like it was a betrayal. I was afraid that even trying out for the role would be the end of our friendship. Our friendship worked right now, and it worked because I was Michael's sidekick. It worked for me, it worked for him. But what would happen if I, in some way, tried to establish myself as a separate person, an equal person? What if I emerged from his shadow? I didn't want to necessarily. I was fine in his shadow. I was very happy there. Except for one thing. I wanted to get the starring role of Felix Unger in The Odd Couple more than I wanted air. I knew I could do it, and a large part of the confidence I felt had come from being friends with Michael himself. But he wanted the role too, a lot. It would be his senior year and his first legitimate leading role in a high school play, and he felt entitled to it. And he was entitled to it. Everyone I knew in the drama department talked about it just like he did, like the outcome was predetermined. He would play Felix, Herb Patterson would play Oscar, and that was that. I don't think I've ever been more scared than the day I told Michael I was going to audition for Felix. I rehearsed what I would say and how I would say it for days. It was a brilliant, cowardly lie. I told him that I wanted to play Murray, but was going to read for Felix because the scenes were longer and Mr. Holthouse would get a better sense of my range that way. I was literally shaking as I said all this. I could feel my throat closing up. I could barely get the words out. And this was the way I felt whenever I tried to confront my mother. Some inborn fear of obliteration if I ever got close to standing up for myself. Michael listened, looking at the ground and slowly shaking his head. And then when I was done, he looked up into the sky and let out a huge laugh and literally slapped me on the back and said he thought it was a fantastic idea. And I was so relieved for about 5 seconds because his laugh sounded fake to me. And that had never happened before. In fact, it scared the hell out of me because for the first time since we'd been friends, I suddenly felt like I had no idea who this guy was. All his bluster and bravado that had buoyed me and given me a sense of self-worth suddenly felt hollow and meaningless, and an even bigger lie than the one I'd just told him. Even worse, I knew on some level I'd really hurt him. We went to dinner that night at Burger Continental, and things got better, slid into the old groove. We talked about anything and everything except The Odd Couple. Afterwards, we headed to the UA Theater on Colorado Boulevard for the opening night of American Werewolf in London. I was loving every second of it. But as the movie went on, the gnawing fear and now guilt came back to me. In the movie, the main character, David, abandons his best friend Jack in the English countryside when they're attacked by some weird animal. Now Jack is a blood-covered ghoul trapped in an undead state, and David's a werewolf. The scenes between the friends are hilarious and terrifying and heartbreaking. But the one that really bothered me was the one in which Jack begs his best friend to help release him from his undead state in the only way that will truly work: by killing himself. Why did that scene feel so much like me and Michael? Why did it feel like no matter what happened, the only way forward was for one of us to die? Thank you for joining me on Richard Hatem's Paranormal Bookshelf. Please join me next time for the final episode of Season 3, The Siren Call of Hungry Ghosts, Part 2. Richard Hatem's Paranormal Bookshelf is presented by Astonishing Legends, 134 West, and Summerland Entertainment. Executive producers, Scott Philbrook, Forrest Burgess, and Susan Lambert. Our associate producer is Tess Feifel, and our sound designer, engineer, and editor is Kevin Ducey. Artwork is by Tommy Beaver, website is by Kayla Lord, and our music, as always, is by Nima Kazaruni. Until next time, be safe and be well, find the light in the dark, and we'll see you again soon.